11%. That's the share of Americans between 55 and 59 who are actually retired right now. 11. Not retired and comfortable, retired, period. Meanwhile, the same surveys tell us that Americans think the ideal retirement age should be 58. So basically, almost everyone wants to retire by 58, and almost no one actually does. And the few who managed it, they didn't stumble into it. They built something that the people still behind a desk at 68 never built. And I'm going to show you exactly what that structure looks like, why it works, and at what age each piece has to go in before the window closes. 13% of workers don't think they'll ever retire. Let that sit for a second. Not, I haven't planned when. Not, I'll figure it out. I don't think I'll ever stop working. Only 32% of Americans aged 60 to 64 were retired in the most recent Gallup data, down from 41% 2 decades earlier. So the trajectory is moving in the wrong direction. More people working longer, not fewer. At the same time, according to EBRI's 2026 Retirement Confidence Survey, 46% of retirees left the workforce earlier than planned. And in 76% of those cases, circumstances outside their control drove the decision: a health problem, a layoff, or a family member who needed care. Just 21% said they retired early because they are financially stable. So when I say the people who retire at 55, I mean the ones who chose it, the ones who engineered it. They are a statistically small group. And the gap between them and everyone else is not luck, income, or inheritance. It is 4 decisions made in a specific order at specific windows in life that create entirely different financial trajectories. And the most important one, the one that determines almost everything else most people skip entirely, I'm going to show you all 4. Here's the thing. The conventional retirement narrative in America is built around a very specific sequence. Work hard, maximize your 401k, wait until 65 or 67 when the government says you're allowed to stop, then live off whatever's left. That sequence has one fatal flaw. It optimizes for the system's convenience, not yours. The average retirement age in the US is currently 62. Social Security's full retirement age is now 67 for those born after 1960, while Medicare eligibility begins at 65. So there's already a 5-year gap between when most people actually stop working and when the government even begins to recognize them as retired. And the financial infrastructure around retirement, the advisors, the fund companies, the employer plans, is built around keeping you inside that system as long as possible. The people who retire at 55 broke out of that sequence on purpose. They understood something about how compounding, fees, healthcare, and market timing interact that the standard retirement advice machine has very little incentive to explain clearly. I've spent more than 10 years running my own businesses, surrounded by accountants and tax lawyers, watching how money actually moves versus how people think it moves. The gap between those two things is where most people's retirement plans quietly collapse. So let me show you the gap. Think about 2 farmers. Same region, same soil quality, same amount of land. Farmer 1 plants every season, harvests only what he needs to live on, and puts the rest of the yield back into more seeds. His fields expand every year. After 30 years, he owns 12 times the land he started with and hasn't worked the fields himself in a decade because the operation is large enough to run without him. Farmer 2 harvests everything, every season, spends the proceeds on a good life, and starts over with just enough seed to replant. He works hard, he's disciplined, he produces plenty. But 30 years later, he owns the exact same plot he started with and is still out there at dawn, 7 days a week. The difference isn't effort. The difference isn't even yield per acre. The difference is what happened to the seeds that weren't planted back in. I'm going to come back to these 2 farmers throughout this video because they are every financial decision you will ever make wearing a hat and some overalls. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the specific fee structure that is quietly eating between 1.25% of your retirement, and it's one that most people have been told to ignore. But first, here's why the savings rate story is even more broken than you think. You think the problem is income. It is not. Although the average is nearly $245,000, the median 401k balance among 5 to 6 4-year-olds is $87,571. The median, not the bottom, the middle. Half the country within a decade of retirement has under $88,000 saved in their primary retirement vehicle. Meanwhile, Americans say they need $1.26 million to retire, according to the Northwestern Mutual Planning and Progress Study. There is a gap between those two numbers that doesn't get smaller by earning a little more and saving a little more. It gets smaller by starting earlier and structuring the system differently. Critically underprepared for retirement, 55-year-old Americans enter a crucial 10-year countdown to plan and prepare. And according to Prudential's 2024 Pulse of the American Retiree Survey, the median savings for 55-year-olds is just $47,950, against a recommended target of $446,565. That gap is not a math problem, it is a behavioral one. 67% of 55-year-olds have not even calculated how many years their current retirement savings will last. There's a guy I'll call Marcus. He spent his career in sales, made good money, hit his quota almost every year. His income wasn't the problem. By the time he was 48, he was earning $110,000 a year, comfortable by any measure. But Marcus had what I privately call a lifestyle escalator. Every raise got converted into a nicer car, a bigger house, better vacations. His savings rate hovered around 6 or 7% because he matched his 401k just enough to capture the employer contribution and called it retirement planning. He was, in the language of the financial planning industry, on track. Except he wasn't. Because the destination he was on track toward was retiring, broke at 67, not free at 55. Here's the math that nobody puts in a headline. If Marcus had started at 30 with a $60,000 income and saved 20%, $12,000 a year into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund averaging 10% annual returns, and just kept doing that for 25 years without ever touching it, he would have arrived at 55 with approximately $1.2 million. No raises, no windfalls, no inheritance, no luck. Pure arithmetic. Instead, he started saving seriously at 43, by which time he was saving a larger dollar amount per year, but the compounding runway was gone. Starting 13 years later with more money per year does not close a 13-year compounding gap. It narrows it a little. The early years aren't more important because the deposits are bigger. They're more important because each dollar has more time to compound. A dollar invested at 30 has 25 years to grow before you're 55. A dollar invested at 43 has 12 years. The math on those $2 is not comparable. The people who retire at 55 started earlier, saved more as a percentage of income regardless of the dollar amount, and this is the critical part. They never inflated their lifestyle at the same rate as their income. They allowed the gap between what they earned and what they spent to grow. That gap is the field. The seeds planted in it are the investments. Farmer One, every year, without interruption. Now, the most dangerous thing about Marcus's story isn't that he didn't save enough. It's that he never thought he was doing anything wrong. His coworkers had the same savings rate. His advisor told him he was doing fine. The system around him validated every spending decision because the system profits from his consumption, not his freedom. And that brings me to the second decision, the one that silently transfers hundreds of thousands of dollars from your future to someone else's present. Here is a question nobody asks at a dinner party. What is the 1% fee your financial advisor charges actually costing you over 30 years? The industry answer is 1%. The real answer is 1% compounded year after year on a growing portfolio, which means the fee grows as your portfolio grows. And every dollar you pay in fees never gets the chance to compound. It is a second drag on every dollar, running in the background, invisible on any given month statement, but catastrophically visible across decades. Let me give you current numbers. A portfolio with a 1% AUM fee starting at $500,000 with 7% annual returns would grow to approximately $2.15 million after 25 years. The same portfolio with no fee would reach about $2.71 million, a difference of more than the starting balance. Scale that up. Take a $1 million portfolio growing at an annual rate of 7% over 30 years. A 1% fee could shrink that portfolio by about 25% over 30 years, translating to nearly $1.9 million less in final value. $1.9 million. Quietly compounding against you for 30 years because you accepted a fee structure that sounded like just 1%. Now, ask yourself what you received in exchange for that fee. According to the Morningstar Active Passive Barometer for year-end 2025, only 38% of active strategies survived and beat their passive counterparts. Just 21% of active funds survived and beat their average index peer over the decade through June 2025. The US large cap market has been particularly challenging for active managers, and just 8% of them survived and beat their average passive rival over that same 10-year period. Let me say that differently. You are, in the most likely scenario, paying a significant percentage of your life savings for someone to produce results that a Vanguard index fund would have beaten at a cost of 0.03 to 0.1%. Vanguard founder John Bogle pioneered index investing in 1976. The philosophy is simple. Since most active managers fail to beat the market after fees, why pay them to try? 50 years of data later, the answer to that question has not changed. And here's the thing I find genuinely funny about this, in a quiet, amused sort of way. The product being sold, active management, stock picking, beating the market, has a public, audited, multi-decade track record of underperforming the free alternative. And yet the money keeps flowing in, not because it works, because it feels like doing something. Because putting money into a boring index fund and ignoring it for 30 years feels negligent, even when the outcome data is completely unambiguous. Farmer One doesn't try to outsmart the weather. He plants in good soil, in the right season, and lets the compound growth of a healthy farm do what compound growth does. The advisor telling him to try more exotic crops, more active rotation, more trade and intervention, that advisor is charging by the acre. And every intervention costs seeds. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Now here's the really uncomfortable part. I just described two factors, early savings rate and low-cost passive investing, that together explain most of the structural gap between retiring at 55 and working until 70. But there's a third factor that is almost completely invisible in standard retirement planning. It is the bill that arrives between the moment you stop working and the moment the government starts covering your health care. And in 2026, that bill just got significantly larger. Here is the part that never makes it into a retirement calculator. Knowing that you need to save more, start earlier, and eliminate fee drag is one thing. Building a system around that knowledge, one that accounts for the actual calendar of your specific exit, is something else entirely. I spent a long time reading the actual research on early retirement failures. Not the general, you need more money advice, the specific failure modes. What breaks a retirement plan between age 55 and age 70, and at which years and under what conditions? I turned that research into a book called The Exit Code, 8 chapters built on 50 years of retirement data. No filler, no generic advice, and no incentive to keep you dependent on a fee-charging intermediary. 2 things in that book connect directly to where we are right now in this video. The first is what I call the $14,000 invisible bill, the specific insurance cost gap that destroys early retirees between 55 and 65 before Medicare kicks in, the one almost nobody models correctly in their retirement plan. The second is the 4% trap, why the withdrawal rule your advisor probably cited to you is inadequate for anyone retiring before 65, and the dynamic withdrawal method that actually holds up under historical stress testing across multiple bad sequence scenarios. The book costs less than a dinner out, and it's built on the same data I use for my own portfolio decisions. Every year you go without a concrete exit framework, the compounding math works against you, not for you. Through the link in the description, you can get it directly. Now, healthcare. There was a woman I'll call Janet who retired at 62. She'd saved reasonably well, about $850,000 spread across a 401k, and a brokerage account. She had run her numbers, built a withdrawal plan, accounted for inflation, and for travel. She felt ready. Then she got her first health insurance. Quote, at the end of 2025, the enhanced premium tax credits that had lowered ACA premiums since 2021 expired and were not renewed for 2026. For early retirees, this means the subsidy cliff at 400% of the federal poverty level is back. So anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single person in 2026 pays full price for marketplace coverage, which can exceed $1,500 a month at age 62 in some rating areas. Let's do the math. $1,500 a month is $18,000 a year. For the 3 years between 62 and 65, when Medicare begins, that's $54,000 in premiums alone, before deductibles, before copays, before prescriptions. And that's only if Janet kept her annual income from retirement withdrawals below the subsidy cliff. If her income rose to $70,000 from a larger IRA withdrawal, that would be above 400% of the 2026 federal poverty level for a single person, and she may no longer qualify for a premium tax credit, facing the full estimated premium of about $1,444 per month is a difference of about $946 monthly, or about $11,352 per year. For the person retiring at 55, the math is even heavier. You're not bridging 3 years to Medicare, you're bridging 10. And the market you're buying into is age-rated. Starting at age 62, the federal rules allow insurers to charge a 62-year-old 2.87 3 times the base premium. For a 63-year-old, the multiplier is 2.952. And starting at age 64, the multiplier reaches the maximum of 3 times the base rate, for the privilege of being older and no longer employed. The average 65-year-old retiring in 2025 can expect to spend about $172,500 on healthcare and medical expenses during retirement, not including potentially catastrophic long-term care costs, according to an annual survey by Fidelity. According to Milliman's 2025 Retiree Health Cost Index, a healthy 65-year-old woman retiring can expect to spend approximately $313,000 on healthcare over her lifetime. A 65-year-old man can expect to spend about $275,000. These figures do not include long-term care, which can add 6 figures more. Your portfolio, in other words, doesn't need to carry only your living expenses. It needs to carry what is effectively a private insurance company until 65, and then a very real, very large, and historically inflation-beating ongoing medical cost structure for the rest of your life. The people who retire at 55 know this number. They've built what is sometimes called a healthcare bridge, a separate cash allocation ring-fenced from their investment portfolio to cover insurance costs, from retirement date to Medicare eligibility, size based on actual current market premiums, not optimistic estimates from a retirement calculator that hasn't been updated since 2020. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because Social Security timing is where the 55 crowd and the 70 crowd are playing the same game on completely different clocks, and the clock matters more than almost anything else. According to the Schroders 2025 U.S. Retirement Survey, 44% of non-retirees plan to file for Social Security benefits before reaching age 67, the full retirement age for everyone born in 1960 or later, and just 10% plan to wait until age 70 when an individual reaches their maximum monthly benefit. The maximum Social Security retirement benefit in 2025 is $5,108 per month, but is reserved for those who delay claiming benefits until age 70. Delaying your Social Security claim to age 70 increases your monthly benefit by roughly 8% for every year you wait past full retirement age. An extra 8% annually in guaranteed, inflation-adjusted, government-backed income is one of the highest certainty returns available to any investor. It is essentially a free annuity you can purchase by waiting. But it only works if your portfolio can cover the gap between retirement and 70 without needing Social Security as a lifeline. For the person who never built the compounding machine, the Social Security timing decision becomes a crisis negotiation. They claim at 62 the earliest eligible age, And if born in 1960 or later, starting benefits at 62 results in monthly benefits 30% less than if they had waited until 67. That 30% reduction is permanent. It follows them for the rest of their life. If they live to 85, they've traded over 2 decades of higher monthly income for the short-term relief of filing early. The compounding gap appears, again, not in a brokerage account, but in the literal monthly check they're going to live on for 30 years. This is also where I want to return to Marcus. Marcus, the sales guy I mentioned at the start, didn't retire at 55. He's 58 now and still working. Not because he loves his job, because at 48, he had a cardiac event that required surgery and several months of recovery. And the financial cushion he would have needed to take that time off was sitting inside a 401k with a 10% early withdrawal penalty he couldn't absorb. He went back to work 6 weeks after surgery. His wife worked. Their lifestyle required 2 incomes. There was no backup system. That is not a dramatic story. It is an ordinary one. Many Americans, 58%, end up retiring earlier than they expected. And of those who retired early, 46% pointed to health-related reasons and 43% cited employment issues. The forced exit is more common than the designed one. Marcus fell into that statistic by not having built the resilience that would have made a forced exit survivable. When people tell me, I'll figure out retirement later, I think about Marcus. Because later is when the health problem hits. Later is when the company restructures. Later is when you realize the compounding runway you needed was actually shorter than you thought, because the end of that runway can arrive before you're ready to fly. Now, you might be asking yourself, okay, I understand the savings rate. I understand the fee drag. I understand the healthcare gap. What's the fourth thing? What separates the people who planned the exit from the ones who got pushed? This one is counterintuitive enough that even people who've done everything else right often miss it. And it operates specifically in the window between retiring at 55 and retiring at 65. The fourth decision is about when you retire in relation to market conditions. Not because you're trying to time the market, but because the math of early withdrawal has a specific vulnerability window that most retirement planning doesn't model, honestly. There's a concept in finance called sequence of returns risk. The core idea is that the order in which your investment returns occur matters enormously once you are withdrawing from your portfolio. 2 retirees with identical average annual returns over 20 years can end up with dramatically different portfolio outcomes, depending entirely on whether the bad years hit early in retirement or late. Negative returns during the first 5 years account for 70% of retirement plan failures, creating a compounding depletion effect that limits recovery potential even when markets eventually rebound. Here's the mechanic. If you retire with $1 million and you need $50,000 a year to live, and the market drops 35% in year 1, your portfolio falls to $650,000. You then withdraw $50,000, leaving $600,000. Now you are withdrawing at close to 8% of a severely reduced base, and the market has to recover not just to make you whole, but to make you whole after ongoing withdrawals are permanently locking in those losses. When markets fall in the early years of retirement, you are forced to sell more shares to fund the same withdrawal at exactly the wrong time. Those shares are gone forever and cannot participate in the eventual recovery. A 5% initial withdrawal rate, adjusting for inflation in each subsequent year, actually runs out of money in nearly 25% of historical scenarios, even though a higher withdrawal rate worked when projecting using the lowest 30-year average returns in history. The paradox is real. Average returns can look fine on paper and still kill a plan that started in the wrong sequence. This is why retiring at 55 is not the same calculation as retiring at 65 with the same portfolio. A 55-year-old retiree potentially has a 35 to 40-year retirement to fund. Experiencing a market drop in the early years of retirement can create problems that go beyond the immediate hit to your portfolio, potentially to the point where your portfolio may not last as long as you need. That could prove catastrophic if you're embarking on what could turn out to be a 25 or 30-year retirement. For a 40-year retirement, the stakes are even higher. The people who designed their exit at 55 and stayed retired didn't use a rigid 4% withdrawal rule. They used dynamic withdrawal strategies, pulling less in down years taking advantage of good years, and maintaining 1 to 2 years of living expenses in cash specifically to avoid selling equities during corrections. Every year you delay Social Security reduces the amount your portfolio must provide, directly reducing your withdrawal rate during the high-risk window. A $1,000 per month Social Security increase is equivalent to having $300,000 more in portfolio assets at a 4% withdrawal rate. The passive investing point lands differently here too. In 2025, passive large blend strategies attracted inflows of $353 billion, while more than $375 billion in active large blend strategies headed for the exits. The institutional money, pension funds, endowments, sovereign wealth voted with its feet. Quietly, without a press release, the smart aggregate capital concluded what the data had been showing for decades. And yet individual retail investors, the regular people trying to retire, are still paying for the story of outperformance that almost never delivers. Meanwhile, the people sitting in their 50s reading books or traveling or finally spending time with their kids mostly made one boring investment decision 20 or 30 years ago and left it alone. They put money into diversified, low-cost index funds, automated the contributions, stopped checking the daily market, and compounded quietly. Fidelity found that savers, starting with $100,000 in their 401k who stayed invested in stocks, kept contributing, and rebalance annually would have ended up with $191,463 at the end of the 2022 to 2025 period. In contrast, a saver who got completely out of stocks and stopped contributing would have had a balance of just $105,586. Two investors, same starting balance, identical market conditions, an $81,000 difference from one behavioral choice. That's Farmer 1 and Farmer 2, same land, different relationship with the seeds. Let me make this concrete with real numbers. David is 45 years old, earns $120,000 a year, and has $300,000 already invested in a mix of index funds and managed mutual funds. His current savings rate is 15% of gross income, $18,000 a year going into the market. His blended expense ratio across his current fund mix is 0.75% annually. His question: can he retire at 55? Let's work the numbers honestly. Starting with $300,000, adding $18,000 a year, and compounding at 7% annually for 10 years produces a final portfolio of approximately $838,000. At 4% withdrawal, that generates $33,500 a year. That's not enough to replace a $120,000 income. And it's not enough to absorb the healthcare gap 10 years of pre-Medicare insurance costs that we just established can run into 6 figures. Now change the savings rate to 25%. $30,000 per year, same 7% growth, same 10 years. The portfolio arrives at approximately $1.03 million at 55. Now, eliminate the fee drag. David shifts from funds averaging 0.75% in annual fees to index funds averaging 0.05%. That 0.7% difference, applied through the accumulation phase and then through 30 years of a retirement withdrawal phase, adds between $250,000 and $320,000 in final portfolio value, depending on the model. The fee reduction alone changes the retirement from borderline to workable. A 0.5% fee difference on a $100,000 investment costs approximately $165,000 in foregone wealth over 30 years. David isn't starting with $100,000. He's starting with $300,000, growing to over $1 million. The fee impact is multiplicative. Now, David also models healthcare. 10 years of ACA marketplace coverage from 55 to 65, estimating an average of $1,500 per month and rising to $2,000 as he approaches 65. That's roughly $210,000 in premiums across the decade. He ring fences 3 years of premiums, $54,000 in a separate cash account outside his investment portfolio before he exits. This prevents a sequence of returns risk from hitting his portfolio during the years when he's also paying full healthcare premiums. He leaves Social Security entirely untouched until 70. His portfolio covers the gap. At 70, his monthly Social Security benefit, delayed from 67 to 70, is approximately 32% higher than it would have been at full retirement age. This is not magic. It's a 10-year construction project that requires consistent, boring decisions and a refusal to inflate the lifestyle. Farmer 1, planting every year. Not because it's exciting, but because the math is unambiguous. Now you might be thinking, that sounds like a lot of sacrifice, a lot of deferred living. And here's the thing I want to address directly. The people who work until 70 are also deferring. They're deferring life indefinitely in exchange for a feeling of financial security that, for most of them, never fully arrives. 35% of pre-retirees don't feel prepared for retirement at their ideal age. And roughly 34% are concerned they'll outlive their money if they do retire when they plan to. The sacrifice is happening either way. The question is whether you get the payoff at 55 or never. I once asked a guy what his retirement plan was, and he said, my house, his house. A single illiquid asset in a mid-sized city that he couldn't dividend out, couldn't withdraw from, and also happened to be living in. So his retirement plan was to sell the thing he sleeps in. Bold move, genuinely inspired. The psychology underneath all of this is worth understanding, because the financial decisions I've described aren't difficult to execute. They're difficult to sustain, and that difference is everything. Most financial decisions are implicit negotiations with your future self. When you spend money today, you're choosing current you over future you. The median emergency savings for Americans is $600, according to a 2025 survey by Empower. Nearly 2 in 5 Americans, 37%, say they couldn't afford an emergency expense over $400. That is not laziness. That is a deeply embedded present bias, the neurological tendency to prefer immediate over delayed rewards, combined with a consumer economy that is specifically architected to stimulate spending at every interface. The early retirees didn't overcome human psychology through superior willpower. They designed systems that remove the moment-by-moment decision from the equation. Automatic contributions set on the first paycheck of a new job. Dollar cost averaging that doesn't require a monthly buy decision. Spending plans built before income arrives, not after it. They automated the planting so that the seeds went in the ground even when motivation was low, even when the market looked scary, even when the lifestyle escalator was running. One decision, repeated automatically, is infinitely more reliable than a discretionary decision made every month for 40 years under varying conditions of stress and temptation. There's a structural irony in how most people interact with their advisors. At a 4% withdrawal rate in retirement, a 1% advisory fee represents 25% of your annual retirement spending. The fee accounts for $1 of every $4 you withdraw. You are literally funding a quarter of your advisor's annual cost from your own retirement spending, while in most cases receiving investment returns that an index fund would have produced for free. I'm not saying advisors don't provide value. Tax planning, behavioral coaching during a market crash, estate coordination, those things have real value for some people. But the asset under management model, applied to a straightforward, diversified portfolio, is fundamentally misaligned with your interests. The advisor's fee grows as your portfolio grows. Your interest is to minimize the drag on that growth. Those two things are in direct structural conflict. Many advisors charge a fee that's a percentage of assets under management while also investing client money into actively managed mutual funds that carry separate expense ratios. Investors effectively pay 2 layers of fees tied to the same portfolio. Farmer 1 never paid 2 people to plow the same field. Marcus, by the way, 58, still working, still planning to figure out the retirement date when the time feels right, is not in a uniquely bad position. He can still restructure. He can still close the gap, but the window he had at 30, at 35, at 40, where the compounding math was on his side and the seeds had maximum time to grow, that window is narrower now. Every year he waits, the construction project costs more because the runway is shorter. The time will never feel right. Retirement readiness is not a feeling, it's a number. And the number only arrives if the system is running. Marcus built a career. He did not build a parallel compounding machine. A career without that parallel structure means the career doesn't end by choice. It ends when the body or the employer makes that choice first. Data shows that 31% of early retirements occur due to health issues, while 32% result from company-related changes such as layoffs or restructuring. The forced exit is waiting for everyone who didn't design the voluntary one. So, 3 practical takeaways calibrated specifically to this problem. First, if you are under 45 and your savings rate is below 20% of gross income, that is the only lever that matters right now. Not stock selection, not sector rotation, not researching which ETF is most optimized for your risk profile. The savings rate, and specifically, automate it before you see the paycheck. The behavioral science on this is unambiguous money you never see. Land in your checking account doesn't feel like sacrifice. Money you have to manually transfer out of checking feels like loss every single time. Build the system so the planting happens automatically. Farmer One doesn't have to decide whether to plant each spring. The calendar decides. Second, model your healthcare costs as a hard, non-negotiable budget line from your planned retirement date to age 65. Not as a rough estimate, as a contractual commitment to your exit plan. The enhanced ACA premium subsidies that cushioned early retirees from 2021 through 2025 expired at the end of 2025 and were not renewed for 2026. Anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single person is now paying full marketplace rates that can exceed $1,500 per month at 62. Multiply that by 12 months, by up to 10 years if you're targeting 55, and add your estimated out-of-pocket medical costs. That number belongs in your retirement model today, not when you're 54 and suddenly discovering it's a 6-figure structural gap. Third, eliminate any investment fee above 0.2% annually on your core portfolio. A 1% fee on a $1 million portfolio growing at 7% over 30 years reduces the final value by approximately 25%, nearly $1.9 million less than the same portfolio paying no fee. That is not a rounding error. That is not a theoretical concern. That is a second retirement account's worth of money, handed to a third party, compounding against you every year for 3 decades. You can get the same diversification, the same rebalancing, and the same long-term performance profile from a 3-fund index portfolio that costs less than a cup of coffee per $1,000 per year. The math does not care whether you believe in it. Marcus will probably retire at 66 or 67, maybe 68 if another health episode extends the timeline. He'll have Social Security, whatever he's managed to accumulate, and a house that was too expensive to sell at the right time. It's a real life. A lot of people live it. The people who retired at 55 aren't different species. They're the same people who looked at the same math at some point before it was too late to act on it and made different decisions, smaller decisions, more boring decisions, repeated more consistently, and let the compounding engine do what compounding engines do when you don't interrupt them. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. The 13% of Americans who think they'll never retire aren't failing because they lacked talent or opportunity. They're failing because the machine they built was never designed to set them free. It was designed to keep them employed. That design was a choice. The redesign can be